Bacrania, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for
I
having me.
I stumbled and hesitated a little bit on that because today we're recording this on December. I don't normally timestamp things, but this is actually a super relevant podcast for today because it is the end of 2025. It's December 31st. It is New Year's Eve afternoon. And we're going to post this, I think, in the first week of January of 2026. And so the topic is simply around strategic planning or annual planning or however you want to position it. I always think about it as strategic planning. And you are my guy. You are the guy that I've been working with for years, over a decade, I think, right?
Not quite that long, but getting there.
Oh, that's right, because
Yeah.
the business I have right now hasn't even been around a decade, but like 8 or 9 years or so. And but prior to that, I was doing some strategic planning in different capacities and so on. There's everybody probably knows Vern Harnish and scaling up, or Gino Wickman's EOS, which isn't Gino's Wickman's EOS anymore, but it's EOS.
Mm.
Gino Wickman's book Traction. David Cummings uses something I think that comes out of scaling up called the one-page plan. David Cummings was the founder of Pardot. You help me with a blend of that. It's more of an OKR, objectives and key results methodology. Gosh, 10, 15 years ago when I started doing this stuff, about 15 years ago, I guess, we used a system called Prometheus. I mean, the systems are plentiful, but
Mm.
they all attempt essentially to do the same thing. And so that's what I want to talk about today is the whole concept of strategic planning. And there's probably a lot of people that are using one of those methodologies right now, and there's a lot of people that aren't using any methodology, or maybe they're doing something on their own. I don't remember what life was like before strategic planning. Like,
Mm.
I don't know. I cannot dig. I'd need a hypnotism or something to dig into the days before we actually sat down and say, okay, what is it we want to accomplish and how are we going to get it done over the next 3 years, and more specifically this year, and even more specifically this quarter. Like, I cannot remember what we used to do.
Mm.
So, having said that, Jay, um, I know you do a lot of this. Is this is what you do for a living? You help companies with their strategic planning. You work for you're aligned with this bigger entity called Cruise Consulting. Is that right?
Cruising Co. Yep.
Cruise and Co.
Yep.
Um, tell me what that relationship is like, and then we'll jump into the strategic planning stuff.
Sure. So I ran my own company for about 15 years, and about probably 10 years, 8 or 10 years into that, I realized I needed some kind of guidance and system to make my way through the challenge of entrepreneurship. And so I found through referral, I found Eric Cruz, who was just coaching individually at the time. And he's a friend and mentor of mine. And he came in as my coach and helped us implement EOS, the operating system you mentioned earlier, entrepreneurial operating system. And I ran that within my company for about 5 or 6 years. And it was extremely helpful in getting us stability, continuity. And as a result of that, I was able to step back, um, elevate one of our leadership team members to COO and then eventually CEO, and then pursue my own new passion or newer passion. It's been almost a decade now since I've been doing this of coaching. So I kind of joke that I was a fine entrepreneur, but I think entrepreneurship was my jumping off point to coaching. And I coach leadership teams and individuals through Cruise and Co. I've aligned with Eric. We used to be part of EOS, and then probably 5 or 6 years ago, left. Eric started his own company. I was the first consultant there. And so now, yeah, I spend most of my working time. I still am a a board member of my own business, owner of my own business, but spend most of my time now coaching um, leadership teams and individuals.
And I'll tell you, you are the reason I asked you to join me here. You are hands down, in my opinion, you do not need to respond to this. You are hands down one of the best coaches I've ever run across. And that's why at the turn of the year, I thought it'd be so cool to have you on here to talk about your journey as a coach and to help virtually coach all of our listeners here. So cruisingco.com, that's CREWSANDCO.com if you're interested in understanding what the bigger entity looks like that Jay is aligned with. Jay Bacrania, Bacrania. That's Jay. Um, so Jay, uh, oh, by the way, a little side note here. If you're listening and you're interested, I've interviewed Vern Harnish a couple times on this, and Gino Wickman once about EOS. If you're interested in hearing those, it's less about the methodology and actually less about strategic planning and more about their journeys in creating those methodologies. If you're interested in listening to those, just do a search for Vern or Gino in your podcast player. Having said that, Jay, walk me through. Let's just start here, if we could. Walk me through what you think is a good annual planning process.
Sure.
Pretty big question, and that's a very,
Yeah.
very broad question. In fact, I could probably just let you talk for the next hour or so, and
Let's
that'd be the
let's see how
podcast.
long. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I could describe for you kind of the 6 weeks around an annual meeting and an annual planning session.
Yeah,
But
let's do
that by
that.
itself, yeah, I'll start with that, but I just want to give some context first because that by itself is, helpful, um, but it's not going to be typically enough for most companies. And so at a higher level or sort of
Wait.
stepping back,
6 weeks of planning is not enough for most companies in terms of shedding an annual plan.
yes, well, it's enough to create an annual plan, but it's not enough to actually execute on that plan.
Okay.
And so an annual plan without some kind of um, context or system to execute on that
Mm.
annual plan is basically like a nice way of creating a vision board and then not looking at it ever again.
So
That's not bad. Yeah.
I forget the word you just used, but a methodology or
Yeah.
the system. You're talking
Yes.
about the cadence of meetings, how often you go
Exactly.
back and reference these things, how
Exactly.
much are you monitoring where you are on the roadmap and so on, that kind of stuff.
The way I like to think about it is it's sort of there's a backbone to all of this. And it spans from a long-term vision for where an entrepreneur wants to go. That could be as clear as EOS used to have a crystal clear certain number of people on EOS by a certain time. That was their company's goal. Or it could be as broad as just having a certain type of impact. But there needs to be some clarity on the long term or the directionally where somebody wants to go. And that goes all the way down, frankly, to the daily execution, right? So there's the long term, there's the medium term, which might be 3 or 5 years ahead. There's the annual plan, there's the quarterly plan, as you mentioned. There's some kind of weekly cadence, and that then cascades into what everybody does on a daily basis. So we can talk about the annual section, but we have to understand that without some kind of broader context that it sits in, it's then just more of a visioning exercise, which is
Hmm.
not bad. It's better if you don't, that's better than not doing anything. But it's not enough. So I'll start with the annual piece and then kind of branch out from there. So what I generally recommend my companies to do, the companies I work with, is to start thinking about annual planning really in the last quarter of the year. So as you know, we do this together. We do our quarterly all day meetings to reflect on the previous quarter to plan the quarter ahead. So in the third quarter meeting, we really want to start thinking about, all right, our annual meeting is coming up soon. For many companies, that's in December or January, not all. Our annual meeting is coming up soon. And so, what do we need to do in the last quarter to prepare for the next year? And so, in many cases, that's thinking, visioning. But sometimes that's data gathering or sort of laying the groundwork for a future project or exploring something so that when a company walks in to that annual meeting, they have the information they need to make a commitment for the year. And so the annual planning process, I'd say in earnest starts in that last quarter and then really kind of heats up, let's say about 6 weeks or 2 months before the annual meeting. So really in the middle of that quarter, the leaders of the company should be at that point thinking about what's next. Um, they should be connecting with all of their stakeholders, ideally the whole company, gathering information. You know this, you do this in your company, gathering information about what they feel, what everybody feels is important to be focused on, synthesizing that information, ideally coming up with a draft plan for their year, and then walking into that annual meeting kind of having pre-thought about a lot of things and ready to put it all together into an annual plan. And so what is an annual plan? What does it consist of? Um,
Jay, let me stop you there for a second, just for a little, as EOers would say, experience share here.
yeah,
So we used to do our annual meeting, planning meeting in January, like in the first couple weeks of January. And this year we did it actually early-ish December. It was like December 8 or
yeah,
9. And so I went back to the team this year. I said, okay, guys, as we're planning out 2026, we already booked you for certain dates a year from now. So we've got you in the calendar. But I asked the team, I was like, do you guys want to do annual planning in December or do we like it in January? And hands down, my opinion as well was December is a better time because then we feel like we're going into the year ready to go. It also gives us a little time to process and massage the plan for the next year before the next year begins. So for us, the timing around it, mid December, early December is a really good time for that strategic planning for the next year.
I like that too. And I liken it to, a lot of people like to make a to-do list for the next day, top couple of things you want to get done. And at least for me, when I do that at night, I sleep better. I wake up in the morning, I'm ready to go versus if I do that in the morning. And so if you it's very arbitrary, the new year, but if everybody's oriented towards it, if you wake up on January 1st and you feel like you know where you're going, that does bring a sense of psychological settledness. The
Mm-hmm.
flip side, I've got some companies that run, end of January to end of January, right? It's 12 months really,
Oh,
is
I don't like
is how
that,
they think
Jay.
about
Jay, I don't like that. We might even
it.
have to cut that from the podcast. Is
It,
how much I don't like that. It just doesn't fit into
it
this.
doesn't fit. It doesn't fit into the mental model. But let me actually spend a moment talking about timing, actually, as a sidebar. We think about annual planning, but 365 days is quite, I mean, there's a reason for it, but it's quite arbitrary in terms of how long it takes to get certain things done and how it matches up with a particular business cycle. And so I like annual planning, right? Everybody likes New Year's resolutions. It's a new start. It's really nice. It feels good. And we also have to be mindful that it's not always the right fit for every company. And so what I mean by that is for some companies, that annual plan, yes, we can cast out the whole year. It makes total sense. We tell a story about how the year is going to go. But for a lot of other companies, their iteration cycles need to be a lot tighter. This is especially true for startups or for companies that are in the midst of some kind of significant pivot. You might know a thing about both of those things. Um, and so if your cycles are a lot tighter, it's important to understand that when you go into annual planning, because you don't want to try to cast out a plan for an entire year when it's not really the right fit for a company. And you end up then feeling really bad about yourself 3, 4, 5, 6 months into the year because you couldn't cast the right plan. And so I always think it's good to plan on an annual and quarterly basis, but how tightly you hold yourself to those things depends to some degree on how your business operates and what the cycles are that your business needs to best operate on.
Yeah, you touched on something. We don't need to into this in great detail, but it's like when you're setting goals or objectives, generally we want those to be measurable. And oftentimes goals and objectives are related to sales. And so you can be rather aggressive about setting those goals and objectives, or a little more realistic. And with the aggressive goals often comes the sense of like disappointment versus this fabricated feeling of success if you set your goals lower. So it raises an interesting question, but it got me thinking about Dan Sullivan's book, Gap in the Gain.
It's a great book.
Yeah, it's
Great
a phenomenal
concept.
book, and it's a
Yeah.
theme. It's not a complex book. It's in fact
No,
the title
yeah,
is pretty much the book.
that's it.
It's the theme is about acknowledging the wins from where you came from versus the gap of what you haven't achieved yet, and that's a balance, man. I think that's a real balance. It's a mind game to that balance between achieving and winning, yet accepting that it takes time and you're not always going to hit your numbers.
Yes, yes, it's such a balance. And that's one of the things I've learned after doing this for many years is that goal setting itself. So kind of jumping off from where we were, talked about the annual planning process to walk into the meeting. Well, what do you do in that meeting? Well, typically you review the last year, you review
This is
the
good. Yeah,
long
keep going.
range
I'm going
vision
to
of where
keep
we're
trying
going.
to derail you, Jay. You can't bite. Do not bite. Keep going back to it. So in the meeting,
No, no, yeah.
pick it up
So
from there. So you review the last year.
you review the last year. You try to understand and learn from what happened. Um, Celebrate. It's a huge one, especially for hard charging people. To your point, we often look at the gap, not the gain.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and really try to just sort of, there's a ritual of closing out the year and saying, okay, it's done. We're going to move on now. Um, and then we want to check back in on our vision. Where are we going? Is it still the same long range vision? Is it directional? Is it more specific? Is there a change? What have we learned from the last year to update where we're going? And then from there, we want to cascade that down, look at the long range, then look at the medium range, and then set specific goals for the year and specific goals for the quarter. And those goals need to be ideally as specific as possible. But to your point, we don't always know enough to get super specific. And I want to talk about that in just a second. I'm going to lay the context and come back to that. And then each goal has an owner. Then we set goals for the quarter. Each goal has an owner. And that then becomes our playbook for the next segment of the journey, whatever that is, typically a quarter for most companies. And so coming back to the goals piece and then tying it back to what you said earlier about that sort of balance, that art of balancing the ambitious goals, the BHAGs, so to speak, big, hairy, audacious goals, the pushing into the unknown and the excitement of that with the disappointment of not being able to hit something. Um, what I've learned and really am embracing more recently is that there are really two kinds of goals. And this is nicely articulated in the book about OKRs by John Doerr. I don't know how you pronounce it. Doerr, I believe. Um, and he talks about aspirational or learning goals versus committed goals. And I read that years ago and sort of started to understand it lightly then, but really it's come into much more clear focus for me in the last couple of years. And so what I believe it means, or at least what I've taken it to, the way I've understood it is there really is a spectrum on which we set our goals. There are certain goals that we set that are going to be, we know how to do them, and it's just a matter of focus and execution, maybe a little bit of stretch, maybe a little bit of luck. But by and large, if we stay accountable, stay focused, we can hit those goals. And so an example of that is if we understand our business model, if it works, if it's replicable, and we just need to do more of it, and we need to solve some problems along the way to do more of it, that's generally a committed goal. However, on the other side is what we would call aspirational or learning goals. And an example of that is, hey, we want to try to branch out into a completely new product or a completely new market, or we've been stuck for many years and we're trying to figure out how to get unstuck. Those are what I would call aspirational goals or learning goals. And if you try to hold yourself to account to an outcome on a learning goal that you don't actually know how to get to, you're rolling the dice on psychologically how you're going to feel about that by the end of the year. Versus, a committed goal, you should hold yourself accountable. You should push hard for that. You should drive it forward. There should be sort of regular weekly accountability on it. There should be celebration. There should be a feeling of, unease if we're not hitting it. That's all great. When we confuse the two, we get into trouble. So on those aspirational learning goals, we do have to set a target, ideally. Typically, we want something specific to orient us, right? Launch XYZ product by the end of this year and get a certain number of users, for that product, or launch this new service and generate a certain amount of revenue. But we have to understand that that's just our best guess, and there's a lot of hoops we have to jump through and problems we have to solve along the way. And so in those aspirational goals, time is something that we have to be more thoughtful about, right? The committed goals, we generally know how to do it. We can set a time frame, we can drive and hit it and celebrate at the end. And that's sort of what most of us understand as goal setting. On the aspirational learning goals, it's more like, hey, we want to get to this place. We want to try to get there in this amount of time, but hey, there's a lot that's we've got to learn along the way to figure this out. And so I've worked with companies and even in my own company where we've set, what we thought was a reasonable time frame on something, worked as hard as we could, spent a lot of money on it, and got nowhere in the matter of, a full year, or not necessarily got nowhere, but ruled out a lot of things that it wasn't to solve whatever problem we're trying to solve. And if a company can't sort of show up and hold that with sort of an openness and an attitude of curiosity and learning and growth, then that becomes really tyrannical. It really kills the mood, kills the vibe of a whole company, puts people in a scarcity mindset. But it's a fine balance because you also can't allow underperformance, right? You don't want to allow underperformance. You don't want to make excuses. So this is what you're talking about, that real psychological dance that a leader has to do to say, hey, are we doing everything we can? If we're working as hard as we can, we're trying to solve an unknown problem. We did our best. We didn't get the results we want. Well, let's celebrate that we learned a bunch. But if it's actually, hey, we didn't really work as hard as we could, we weren't as creative as we could, we don't have the right people in the right seats, then that's a problem that has to be addressed. And knowing which one is which is actually not so easy, especially for leaders who haven't, had as many reps or don't have somebody who helps facilitate.
This is where I find it really helpful to have you guiding us, is because I can facilitate a conversation. My partner Cameron, who's our COO and president, and he runs this program internally. He's our integrator. He owns our OKR process. Um, we have the questions that we're always asking ourselves, but then you come in and you flip things around and twist things and fold them in half and ask us a different question from a different angle that gets us thinking about everything a little bit differently. And I think that's where you make your money, is not necessarily implementing the system, but it's almost like being our counselor throughout the
Mm,
process. Our coach. You're our coach, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so we have all these different methodologies, OKRs, EOS, scaling up. I mentioned one called Prometheus. And then of course you could listen to this podcast and just kind of make up your own thing. If someone's listening to this, what, and they do not have a process, they feel as though they could probably do a better job with annual planning. What would you recommend? Like, what should they do? Should they read one of these books? Should they map something out? I mean, let's assume that they want to try to do something on their own rather than hire a J or someone
Yeah.
from Cruise or an EOS consultant or whatever.
So really depends on the size of the company, the scale of the company, and what they're going through and what the stakes are. And so, starting on the smaller end, let's say you've got 5, 10 person company, um, you maybe don't have the free budget to bring a facilitator in, consultant in to help.
Is that generally where this stuff starts? Is like 5, 10 people as opposed to the solopreneur? I mean,
Yeah. So when I think about the solopreneur, I think a little bit, it definitely starts there. I have, people that I've worked with that are just independent and we do a similar process, but it takes, a couple of hours versus, a couple of weeks. Sometimes it doesn't. But this is an interesting thing that happens is that the annual plan for the company really becomes the annual plan for the individual at that point. Because you have to think about if you're working with a solopreneur, their resources, their whole life, what are they after? And this is also a little bit of a thing that as a sidebar here that I think most closely held businesses, a handful of shareholders or a single, couple of owners, most of them I found get into some kind of confusion about where the sort of direction and vision and goals are coming from. And the same thing applies on that very solopreneur level to even a $100 million business. If there's one person that owns a business, what are the goals of that business? Well, they're basically the same goals that that individual has, and that individual has to really think deeply about what are the goals of my life, and how does that then influence the business? And this is the
so
thing
you
that
want to do
often.
this? You want to go there? You want to talk about the BHAG? You want to talk about? Because I'm
Well,
ready. I'll
yeah,
go
yeah.
there with
We'll,
you if you want to go
we'll
there.
go there. I want to finish the sort of
Fucking
original
Simon
question here
Sinek. That's the
of.
guy. That's the guy. I have a little bit of a beef with Simon Sinek. Go
So, all
on.
right. So,
Yeah.
so, so back to the sort of the question of, if somebody wanted to do this themselves, I think if you have any reasonable free cash flow, relative to sort of your goals, let's say you're in the range of $300,000 of profit and above, it is 100% hire somebody. Right. It doesn't have to be us. Just hire somebody to help you do this because it's very difficult to do this on your own and stick with it and to be able to facilitate and implement and think strategically all of that at once.
We
Now, if you
we
don't
were
have
I
that,
think we were about 1 million when we decided to implement a system on our own. We were not profitable being a software company, that was by design um, yet because we were focused on growth. But that's about from a revenue perspective. That was when we really wanted to get more serious about the setting goals and strategic planning and so on.
yeah, that's where
I,
a lot of companies come into this. Yeah.
and in
It's a
fact,
lot of companies,
we did it on our own for I think about a year. You
2 years. Yeah.
knowing you were very generous in helping Cameron and my partner and me do this on our own. But then there was a certain point. I remember the meeting and I remember the discussion where we were like, we can't do this on our own
I think you
anymore.
called me on a break in a meeting.
Oh my
Like,
goodness. It was an incredible we were down in Atlanta in the woods of Atlanta in a cabin somewhere or outside of Atlanta and we had just had a very frustrating experience as a team trying to get all of us on the same page and
yeah.
we were like we need Jay. Jay needs to be here. Yep.
Um, so for a smaller company who wants to do this themselves, I would say really if you think about the principles, like what are the principles we're trying to implement here? It's very simple. It's at a high level, where are we trying to go? What do we need to accomplish this year? And then what do we need to accomplish this quarter? Now the hack here is most people when their brains start to think about that, they can make the laundry list, like a huge laundry list of things. But these kinds of systems that we're talking about here, they're not like a David Allen getting things done system that's supposed to account for everything that could ever possibly need to be done. And then you triage and sort through how to do it. It's not that. What we're trying to do is rise above all of that and pick the 2 or 3 game-changing things that need to be done for the upcoming period. For many companies, that's a year, but for some companies, a year is too long. That's what do we need to do in the next 3 months? The most important things. We're trying to select those, and then take those back with us into the quarter and use some kind of recurring meeting rhythm and frankly, just a format to keep these top of mind. So at a very high level, right? If the simplest version of this is sit down, say, where are we going long term? What do we want to do in the next year? Limit yourself to three things. That's it. And then what do we do in the next quarter? Again, limit yourself to three things. Those three things sometimes are exactly correlated. Every yearly thing has a quarterly thing, or sometimes they're not, and that's okay. And then basically look at it every week and say, what are we doing to move this forward this week? Are we on track or are we off track? Right? That's the simplest version of it. There's so much more, but that's the simplest version of it. And so I'd say if somebody wanted to do that, just do just that. Try to master just that, right? It'll be hard. There's so many things that to master something that simple, there's so many things that you have to do right.
But it's. I think you're right. It's doing something is better than doing nothing, and it starts to summarize that just based on my experience and what you said is you create this long term vision as long term as you can. You bring it down to a 3 year vision, and Cameron Herold has this great philosophy that actually came from the Gut Junk guy, dang it, I just interviewed him actually. The guy that founded Got Junk, but it's the painted picture
Yeah.
is
Yes.
what Cameron Herold wrote a book about. So creating a picture of what everything looks like in 3 years, and then bringing that down to okay, what do we need to do this year to get there, and then bringing that down to saying what do we need to do this quarter to get to the end of the year, and then down to the weekly level where you do what we call on target meetings, and that's where our leadership team gets together every week in a very structured style, and we go through the metrics to figure out are we doing what we need to do to get to where we need to be this quarter, to get to where we need to be
Absolutely.
this year, to get to where we need to be in 3 years to
Yeah.
accomplish our big vision.
Yeah. And there's two pieces here, right? There's the system and the habits of what you just described, getting together, the meeting rhythm, looking at the same thing, looking at it as a team, asking those questions. That's what I would maybe call the process. And the contents is what do you put in there? What are your actual goals? Honestly, the contents are going to work themselves out if you just can run the process, right, over time. And and in many cases, actually, we discussed this in our last annual meeting with your team. There were a couple of really consequential decisions that happened last year that brought the bulk of the benefit that we were experiencing, in that meeting and looking back and saying, hey, these three or four things probably changed the game for us last year. Some of those things were in our goals, but most of them were not, right? But how did they happen? Because you were running a disciplined process of asking every quarter and every week, are we moving in the right direction? If so, great. If not, where are we stuck? What do we have to do about it? And so, in many ways, what you come up with for the goals is relevant, right? It's important. The longer you do this and the more thoughtful you are, the better you get at it. But really, it's running that process is where the magic actually happens.
So there's a bunch of books. I mentioned Gino Wickman's Traction, which describes the EOS process. Vern Harnish, Scaling Up. You mentioned John Doerr. Is it Measure What Matters? Is that the
Measure what
book?
matters. That's it.
Measure What
Yeah.
Matters
Yeah.
by John Doerr. Um, most entrepreneurs are readers or listeners, and they want to take something that's already been done and mimic that. I know it's efficient, right? So, which how would you recommend somebody get started? Which I'm not asking you to pick a
Yeah.
favorite, but I am asking you to make a recommendation. Is it the
I would
OKR
say
book?
no, no, no. That one is great, but that one's much more about the specifics of setting goals in this particular format.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't really go into the details around the process that I just described. It touches on them. Hands down, the best one out there, in my opinion, is Traction. I think that book kind of it puts it all into one package.
Yeah.
It's deceptively simple. You read it and you're like, oh, yeah, I could do this.
Yeah.
And you go and you try to do it. And,
And then you end up calling
you're
your
like,
friend from
yeah.
Atlanta saying, I need your help.
But it is a wonderful place to start and at least shed some light on what needs to be done. And my recommendation is just to pick you could use that or just what I just described before if you're going to listen to this podcast and try to do something is just outline a one-page version. What am I going to do this year in implementing some kind of planning process? No more than a page, right? Could be we're going to do annual goals, we're going to do quarterly goals, we're going to meet every week, we're going to look at these three things. The simpler, the better to get started. And then, of course, you can always layer on more complexity as you go.
So there's something called the one page business plan, the one page strategic plan. I don't know. I'm sure one of our listeners knows. Maybe you know, Jay. Where is that something completely different, or did that come from one of these methodologies?
I don't know.
Or is maybe it's just
Yeah.
broad enough so it is what it is, but essentially and the methodology we use, which is a hybrid of these, more along the lines of an OKR methodology, it comes down to like vision, mission, values, their value proposition, a 3-year plan, your marketing strategy, and it's all right there in front of you. And
Well, that,
it forces you to
yeah.
focus on some of these things which help guide you through your decisions.
Yeah, and what we're talking about here is what we call a business operating system. Ours is the growth method. Geno's and traction, EOS, that's traction or EOS, scaling up for and harness. What these systems try to do is to put together in a simple, implementable format the key things that any business owner would want to have to run a business thoughtfully, right? You can even go back to E-Myth mastery, right? Gerber, that kind of stuff is it's all tied together, right? What I love about, say, traction, um, and our methodology as well, we don't have a book yet, but we should soon, hopefully, the growth method, is that it puts it together in a way that's just straightforward and simple. And so it's a funny story. I so I've always had a brain that sort of thinks about systems and almost like I feel like if I had to go back and do it over again, I might have become an engineer. I had that's how my brain works, and I'm always thinking about how pieces and things work together and fit together. And so for the first 10 years of my business, I was basically piece by piece trying to assemble this kind of operating system. But one of the ways that my brain doesn't work is in terms of a follow through, right? I'm not great at personally just following through and sticking with something for years and years and years. Definitely a bit of an entrepreneurial profile in that regard. So what I did was like over the years, if you look back at an excavated or like Google Drive or something, you'd see, I came up with at some point a marketing strategy that was effective, right? But then, you know, executed that for a while, but then didn't quite stick to it as much as I would have liked. And then I came up with a goal setting system that was a little too complex. Executed it for a couple of years, but then that fell off as something else caught on fire, right? And so we had a kind of a long range plan and a vision and a mission, but it wasn't as crisp. And so what these business operating systems do is it essentially accelerates like any business owner is going to come to these conclusions because these principles are what help a business run effectively. A business operating system just puts it all together in an off-the-shelf way that shortcuts, anywhere from, depending on how quickly your brain works and how quickly you learn, anywhere from 2 to 15 years of experience in the trenches. And so, to your point, I think that a lot of these they have many similarities, right? Because running a business in our environment, you come to similar conclusions. But they're presented a little bit differently. If I had to pick one off the shelf, I'd say traction is the most straightforward, and direct and easiest to implement out of the ones that I've seen.
So let's one more thing, and then I want to get into this BHAG conversation you and I have talked for hours about over the past year or so. Um, Cameron is my partner. I mentioned his name. He's our integrator. He's our president or COO. We're yin and yang, which is a perfect fit for the way we run the business together. He runs our strategic planning process, not me, the CEO. but Cameron, the COO, the president.
That's,
Do you?
by the way, that's almost always or
That
very
was my
often the case.
question.
Yeah.
So I think in a lot of scenarios you're going to have the CEO listening to this, the founder, but they're going to have a, as Cameron Harold calls it, a your wingman, your I forgot what he calls it actually, your first in command or something like that. But
Yeah.
second in
I think
command.
second in command. Yep.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
like the COO, and um, so you're saying oftentimes that even though I'm the CEO, I may come to the table with a vision. It's okay to have someone else running this process.
Yeah, it's almost always better.
Yeah.
And the reason is not always, but many more times than not, what I've experienced about founders and CEOs, especially of entrepreneurial smaller companies or people who have started their company from scratch, is they tend to be what I call run and gun, or um, you know, basically they have the get up and go to say, let's go do this now. Okay, great. And they have a high threshold and high need for stimulation, high threshold for risk, and a high desire for novelty and change.
Oh
And
my
you
God. I
need
got
that,
this big grin
right?
on my face right now because I feel like you're reading my
Yeah.
horoscope to me.
So you need that in a business, typically, not always, but typically, often you need that. You need the person who's going to get out ahead of everybody else and have the almost the foolishness, if you think about it from a probability standpoint, to say, we can do something here, we can build something, we can make something, we can serve people better. We could beat the competition, right? There's almost, if you just look at the probability of winning in almost any case where you're trying to start a business or create a business, it's going to be relatively low. So you need somebody who has that get up and go. That get up and go is typically not the thing that's going to make the trains run on time and keep people happy. The other way I like to say it is entrepreneurs tend to be like big dogs with big tails, and they're really happy and they look ahead and they're like running around and their tails wagging and knocking, stuff off the furniture, breaking glasses everywhere, but they don't see it. They just see the forward looking thing.
I think
And
you've
so
referred to me as the golden retriever of the
I
company.
might have, I might have. And so in that regard, you very often, especially once you hit, I'd say probably, on the early side, 1 to 2 million, and on the later side, 6 to 7 million in revenue, depending on the type of company. Sometimes it can be higher. But once you, within that range, you generally get to the point where the entrepreneur's skill set is no longer the manager's skill set. It's two different skill sets. And so this is where very often, actually very often in this process, we realize we need a COO because a business is stuck and they need an operator, they need a general manager. And so in most cases, the CEO does not have the managerial skill set to execute this effectively. Not always. Every once in a while, there's somebody that has both. EOS, Gino calls this the visionary integrator dynamic. And you generally need both of those to make a company go, especially if you're trying to scale or grow more aggressively. You really need both those. Cameron Harold's concept is more not that there's two distinct roles, it's more that whatever the CEO's skill set is, the COO fills in what they don't have. So in certain cases, you might have a CEO that's more externally focused, more strategically focused, and then you need a more managerial, internally focused COO. The flip could be true, usually not, right? But you have a more internally focused, maybe a product focused CEO, then you need a COO who's going to be able to do the, external work and the external relations. So kind of depending on the people you're working with, the CEO's personality, you typically are going to want and need that partner who's more, if who generally executes more effectively than most CEOs execute.
Jay, 15 years ago, I read Start With Why, Simon Sinek. I watched every one of his 17-minute versions of the TED Talk, and I had such great admiration. And we and I still do. I admire his ability to take a big concept and dumb it down and to start with why. And I spent the last 15 years struggling because I couldn't quite get it. And it falls in line with the big, hairy, audacious goal thing. Um, is that Gerber who came up with
No, I
BHAG?
think Jim Collins,
That's right,
maybe.
Jim. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jim Collins, the BHAG. And so for a long time, I've been trying to figure out, okay, what's our BHAG? And of course, to get there, start with why. And so we made something up in my last company, which, just for perspective, it was 2015 when I sold that. And this book came out in 2009. So around 2010, 2011, we came up with a why and a BHAG and what it is that drove us to get up every day. And then miraculously, when I sold it, that desire, the BHAG, dissipated and went away.
Curious
So
how that happens, huh?
now it's funny, if Elon were to sell any one of his companies, which actually I don't think he would do because they're all aligned with his life mission, what he wants to do with his life. Like he's building everything for interplanetary settlement, or however you want to. Those are my words. I'm not sure exactly
Mm.
how he would phrase it, but um, it, and so I think starting with why is, I think, a great philosophy for purpose driven businesses. But sometimes there's businesses, I think, that are a really good idea that are designed to be a little bit more, as I describe my company, to be a little bit more of a game. Like, let's create some awesome value and let's make some money while we're doing it, and let's see what we can build here. Like, let's just, I want to create value, I want to build something cool. And so if you ask me to come up with a big, hairy, audacious goal, which I have been trying to do for since the origin of our company, I'm going to come up with something today, and it's going to be different next year. It's going to be different the year after that, very likely, which means it's probably not actually coming from my personal why. And so after 15 years of struggling, I spent about 15 hours or so talking to you, my therapist, actually. I've been seeing a therapist for the past year, and it's awesome. It's just really, really cool to be able to go talk to somebody about anything you want and work through issues. And so I went to her and I talked to her about this issue of, why is it so hard to come up with a vision, a long term vision for the company? And she's like, well, I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I was like, no, tell me why. And she says, well, because your vision has nothing to do with your company. Your vision is about you and your wife and your family. Like, that's what you want to be celebrating when you're on your deathbed. That's what you want to be celebrating in the end. It's not accomplishing this big vision. So it's okay for the company just to be a piece of the journey. And so I'm asking you. So for me, I've settled now with having a 3-year vision. I really, especially with a tech company, I love the idea of having a 3-year vision. I've released myself from this burden of having a purpose driven business with this big, hairy, audacious goal. I really don't like financial, big, hairy, audacious goals because I don't think they're inspirational to the team. They're very inspirational to the shareholders or the owner of the company, but not so much to the team. So anyway, that's my little realization over the years, is it's okay to have a shorter term vision, inspire people towards that shorter term vision of what it is you're trying to do over the next few years, as long as it's constantly evolving. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on my thoughts?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the big, hairy, audacious goal? The start with why. Is it a fit for everybody, and I'm just looking at it the wrong way?
I don't think so. Um, it's been a privilege to walk with you independently, right? So we do our leadership team coaching, but then I work with you independently. And so it's been a privilege to walk with you and to sort of see you wrestle with this question so
You make way
sincerely.
more money than my therapist, by the way. I
Hopefully I
want
come
you to
up
know
with better.
that.
Hopefully I provide as much
I don't know.
value
She's pretty
commensurate
good,
to
man. She's pretty good.
the. Maybe you should. I'll call her. I'll tell her to raise her rates. um, so I think one of the things that I've noticed in coaching individuals over the last many years is this kind of question, this wrestling. And I'll say that, like, I'm just going to throw out numbers in terms of just all the people I've experienced and talked about these things with. I'd say about 10% have that crystal clarity on the long term. This is what my life is for, right? I'm
And are
here
they
to accomplish blank.
are they usually purpose driven? Their
In many
businesses
cases,
are
yeah.
aligned
Yeah.
with their life
Uh,
purpose.
Not always, not always. But I would say in many cases, probably just because of the type of people I'm talking to, entrepreneurs, it usually is. But I would say I would maybe extend that and say, look, if I had to bet, this is a total just guess, but I'd bet about 10% of people have clarity of like something crystal clear in their life where it's like, okay, my life is about this. I am here for this. And the rest of us are sort of, basically feeling our way from one stone. You're crossing a river, you have to walk on the stones, right, to get across. The water's rushing, and you're feeling your way from one stone to the next,
And
right?
somebody
And you,
buys your stone and you're like, cool, I'll go to another river now. Like the
there you
minute
go.
if somebody
Yeah,
gives you a $20 million check,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
are you willing to give up that stone
Right,
that you're stepping on
exactly.
right now? And I'll tell you, most of the time, I'm gonna be
Yeah,
like, yep, here,
here you
you can have
go.
this stone.
So then where does that leave? Like, what does that mean? I don't think it means that we don't try to search for a why or kind of, because I think we're constantly discovering our purpose, right? That you move forward in the world, you try something, you get more information about what you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you enjoy, what you feel like the world needs, where you get that feeling of meaning and that feeling of lighting up is what I call it, just colloquially. As you move forward in an ideal world, you are constantly learning more and more about where you light up. And what I've noticed that some people light up in search of a longer term goal and that orients them, but other people just light up when they're able to stay in a certain space, right? And for you, I think you've talked about it's creative, creating things with people, with technology, right? That's the space that lights you up.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah. That's right.
what I
And it's been
found,
like that since for me in high school. It's
yeah.
been using technology to do cool things. You know, like that.
So
That's
so
it.
it's so I think the concept of a why or long-term why, it's an orienting principle. It orients you in a direction, and it gives that sense of that direction is like, okay, it's worth the time to pursue this. It's worth my putting my life energy into this. That's what a good why does. But I think you can get the same outcome by finding this thing that maybe isn't a long-term why, but it's that space where you light up depending on, and it could be very different for different people. And I think that's just as powerful as an orienting principle as a long-term why, right? These two things are two ways of orienting in the world and figuring out where to move forward to. One has lots of clarity on the endpoint, the other one maybe doesn't, but has a feeling that's quite clear. And then there's even a third way of doing it, which is, hey, I'm building a life. And I know that as part of this life, I need to fund this life. I need to have a living. I need to have a purpose and a job, right? It's only in the modern times that we sort of get to have so much choice about what we do in life. Typically, it was, you handed down your profession, handed down through your family. You do that profession. So in in some cases, I've worked with entrepreneurs where it's like, well, I don't, yeah, my purpose is not in the business, right? I'm not thinking about that. I'm just thinking about building a nice life. And in order to build a nice life, this is the shape that my income generation should take. And I want it to give me energy, not take energy away. I want it to fit in a certain amount of time. I want it to generate a certain amount of money. And that's okay too, right? If you don't have a why or an orienting principle, but you know what problem you're trying to solve, and then you solve that problem. And then the question is, I think what you're wrestling is, well, how do you translate that into a business vision? I think every business vision is going to be as unique as the sort of entrepreneur who's constructing that vision. And I think that as that entrepreneur, part of what they need to do, and part of what I love about working with entrepreneurs is that they they need to go inwards to understand themselves better to set a better vision for their company. Like that's a beautiful dynamic. And if you do it right and you stay open to it, entrepreneurship kind of forces you to do that. Because eventually you get to a point where you're like, well, this is really hard. Why am I doing this? Or I got enough money. Why do I want to work more? Like, what am I doing? And that's when the real magic starts to happen to say, okay, what am I trying to do here? And understanding that and owning that and then translating that. So for some of my companies, that looks like there is a big audacious goal. Um, but for most of them, most businesses are closely held businesses are some kind of lifestyle business. They're serving a purpose for the owner and and for the team, right? Generally, the owners that I work with are thinking about their team, themselves and their team. And so really it's doing the work that you did of wrestling with this. What is the actual vision? Is there a long-term thing? Sometimes it changes. Sometimes there's a period, maybe 5, 10, 15 years, where there's a goal and that's everything, and there's drive around that. And then the company hits that goal, and then it's like, well, now what? And simultaneously, the entrepreneur's life has changed. They now have kids, they've got a family, maybe they got aging parents, they got some other stuff going on. They're like, wait, I don't necessarily want to double this. And so now what? Right. And that's where the magic happens. And so there's no cookie cutter answer to like, how do you translate that into a goal or a why. But I think your intuition, kind of coming back to where you started, is I don't think that every business and every person needs a why. I do think that all businesses need some kind of orienting principle.
Okay.
That could be
Yeah.
a set of goals, that could be a set of values or a set of principles.
And I think a big realization for me, bear in mind after 25 years of entrepreneuring and 15 years since I've read the book Start With Why, just this year I've come to a very comfortable conclusion of how what directs the business. And for the past several years we've had on our strategic plan this question of the BHAG. What is our BHAG? And every year, you know this, Jay, every year we come to it and like, yeah, I don't really like that, but we're also not too worried about it. We're just going to put it aside.
Mhm.
And I think it was one of these things where finally I just got sick of putting it aside and was forced to a point where I needed a vision, a better vision, and it directly conflicted with putting that BHAG aside. And so I was forced to confront it, come up with a conclusion. And the conclusion is I don't want that in our strategic plan. I do not want a BHAG in our strategic plan. It does not work for me. And thus, it's gone. And that decision, I think my team embraced it wholeheartedly. And it feels good just to
Yeah,
eliminate that. And now
that's
we've come up with a slightly different set of tools to help guide us. And I love it. Like but that's kind of this personalization of the process and being able to put my, make a decision for myself as opposed to listening to Simon Sinek and demanding of myself that I start with why.
yes,
Not to
yes.
say there's, and again, I joke that, he's got it wrong. I don't think he's got it wrong. I think it's a really cool methodology. It's not necessarily for me. It's something fun to think about, but it's not for me in my business.
Well, I would actually say that your therapist nailed this, which is I think your why is just larger than your business alone. It's not completely overlapping and aligned. It's
Which is
aligned, but it's
why I
not
will
completely
not be a
overlapping. Yeah,
billionaire, I think.
exactly. And
Yeah.
that's great to know, right? Because that's not what's important to you. One last thing I want to note here is I think depending on the business goals, that structure or the set of goals or the set of the BHAG, however you do that, that that is going to some part of that is going to be dictated by the business goal. So if there's a goal to sell a company, say to private equity in a certain amount of time, because you know that's the best exit. If you're the entrepreneur who says, "Hey, I want to do this for 5 years and have a big exit, and then go do something else for another 5 years, have a big exit," well, then you better have some crystal clarity on the metrics you need to hit. You may or may not have a why at that point, but you're going to have some crystal clear outcomes, right? Maybe BHAGs. Um, Versus if you're running a business more as sort of a creative endeavor, right? You're trying to make money. You want to build a nice lifestyle. You want to pay the people that work for you well. You want to share in that upside, but it's more of a creative endeavor. Like, hey, we're out exploring, building cool things, having fun. Then you can have a very different structure for how you orient yourself. And so I think a lot of what this comes down to is both what's inside the entrepreneur, how they think, how they lead, but also what is the actual concrete goal of running this business and what's the outcome that you're after. Now, last thing I'll say is I want to put one big asterisk on this. Dave, you wrestled with these ideas for, at least 5 years, that specific what is the BHAG, right?
Yep.
If not longer.
Yep.
Um, 15, I guess, if you can't count your previous company, or longer. So you stepped into a system, you wrestle with that system, and eventually you shaped it into something that works for you. One big caution I have for entrepreneurs, because I've just seen this go wrong so many times, is is just whatever system you start with, if you're going to pick a system up, just do that. Do that for a while, do it faithfully, wrestle with it, try to do it exactly as it is. Because if you try to change that too early before you really understand it, then you're just going to be doing the same thing you were doing before having a system, chasing your tail,
Hmm.
trying to figure things out. So I think there's some real value in just committing to something, wrestling with it, and then over time allowing yourself, once you've mastered some key basics and principles, allowing yourself to evolve things as it goes forward.
Jay, I love this conversation. We've talked about this stuff for hours and hours and hours over the years. So I appreciate you recording a session with me like this. If Are you okay with people reaching out to you if they want to continue this in one way or
Yeah,
another?
sure.
All right. What
Absolutely.
is the best way to reach you?
Best way would be, I'm a little old fashioned. I don't have any much of a presence online. So best way is email, j@crewsandco.com, CREWSANDCO.com, J spelled JAY.
Jay, Happy New Year. Thanks very much.
Happy New Year to you. Thanks, Dave. This is great.